Hey everyone, Sam here, and I just want to talk about two of the biggest stocks in the market, Nvidia and AMD, and compare them, which is the better buy. They're both in semis and chips, obviously, and I want to say that AMD is the better buy to give you the answer right away, but watch the rest of the video so you understand why I'm talking about this and why I think Nvidia might be a little bit overvalued right now, despite it being the strongest stock in the market, the highest market cap stock in the market for almost a year now. So let's take a look at starting with Nvidia, just because everyone's familiar with their price action, which has been insane recently. So we're up about 30% just from a month and a half ago, right? And that was this time that the SPY told us that we were going back above previous tariff highs. That's pretty important right here on this day, June 23rd, because we weren't really sure whether it was going to roll over or whether it was going to stay strong, and Nvidia was the liquid leader at that point. However, I will say that now it looks like AMD is taking over that role. And technically, the reason I'm starting with technically is we can see June 23rd when we go right about here. When an AMD broke out, you can see it didn't actually break out from its all-time highs. AMD was basically in this long downtrend since March of last year. Meanwhile, Nvidia, of course, has been the darling of the stock market and just going up and up and up. So it broke over all-time highs at that time. So for that reason, at that time, Nvidia seemed like the clear leader where you want to park your money. Now, Nvidia has sort of had its run and the money is recycling. And that's the reason why AMD technically is the better buy right now, particularly with earnings being pretty solid and it holding in earnings, whereas Nvidia doesn't have earnings until the end of this month, several weeks. So this is a time sensitive video and I'll talk about fundamentals. I know everyone wants to talk about news and fundamentals, so I'll get to that, but I wanted to show the technical part first because I think even if you don't know fundamentals, don't like fundamentals, the chart kind of tells a story, right? So Nvidia. The catalyst here is the AI chips, of course. OpenAI's GPT-5 just released. You can try it out if you go to chat.com as you're watching this video. It's available worldwide to the billion OpenAI users, and it runs on Nvidia. So Nvidia and Tesla, mind you, Tesla is not using their Dojo supercomputer semiconductor. They're choosing Nvidia for their semiconductors, for their GPUs, for their models, and that's a huge vote of confidence for a company that already is the behemoth. So these are the arguments for Nvidia, fundamentally. It's expected to keep growing. Analysts are talking about $6 trillion, right? It was the $4 trillion company, which was unprecedented, seemingly. They got approval to export their H20 AI chips to China. Obviously, if they can be the backbone of China's AI structures, I can't even articulate how big that would be. I don't think that's going to be allowable under China's rule, right? But it never hurts to get a foothold in that market now. Obviously, geopolitically, socially, maybe that's not idyllic to give China access into our biggest company, but you're not here to discuss that. We're here to talk about which stock is going to go up more. And if Nvidia gains access to China's market, Nvidia is going to crush the other semiconductor stocks even more than it already is. Is China going to let that happen? We don't know yet. So there are call options being traded for Nvidia, looking like a push to 190 is felt very possible by investors, to say that in the most calmest way possible. Basically insane people are buying call options up around the 190s, even 200s. But is it really insane? Not really. I mean, Nvidia hasn't slowed down. It's held. It could break out over this level again. So look, increasing options activity is a big deal. This was back when the sort of Saudi meeting with the administration happened, and administration is basically synonymous with big tech. So after that, it became clear that Saudis wanted access to GPUs, and that's synonymous with Nvidia, and Nvidia went on a huge run. So those have been the reasons for Nvidia's recent run. That is the reason for Nvidia's continued dominance with the China market expansion. With all that said, I told you technically why AMD might be a better buy. Now let's talk fundamentally a little bit about AMD and why it might be a better buy. So, strong sales, personal computing and gaming. Obviously, it's doing the same thing as Nvidia, basically. But some challenges with export restrictions. They aren't able to ship the MI308 chips to China. So Nvidia isn't facing that, AMD is. So I'm just going to get that out of the way because I talked about the China market for Nvidia. However, look at this earnings. $8 billion, high demand for their next gen chips, MI350. Analysts are bullish. And I don't think you can completely compare these just based on market cap, right? Nvidia's market cap is half of, AMD's market cap is half of Nvidia. But if you can look a little bit at revenues, it can give us a hint at least. AMD reported almost 8 billion revenues, and that's up 30%. And Nvidia first quarter revenue was 40 billion, a little over that. That's up 70% year over year. Okay, there was a reason people bought Nvidia after Nvidia's last earnings, and Nvidia went on an absolute rocket run here. I'm just saying, I don't know that this is completely sustainable. Okay, and we don't want to bet on earnings. Whereas with AMD, technically, I mean that looking at the chart-wise, earnings just came out, so you don't have to bet on earnings. It's holding after earnings. It did have this reaction downwards, but came back up. This is basically the market being represented in these candles. If we look at the market, that's what the market basically did. This is 8.4, so it's a little bit delayed, but that's what's going on here. AMD is holding, and stocks that just had earnings that are holding are pretty exciting to look at. Now, here's the last little fundamental question. Nvidia's forecast for Q3 is around 30 billion. AMD's forecast is around 8.5 billion. So for Nvidia, that forecast is actually down a little bit from 40 billion to 30 billion. AMD's is up from 7 billion to 8.7 billion to be specific. And that's a fundamental reason why you might look for Nvidia to taper off a little bit and AMD to take some of that institutional money over the next quarter. I'm giving you these plays on a quarter by quarter basis, maybe even month by month, depending on how much you are active, how often you check your portfolio. And that's super important. This is a swing trading channel, so you might trim a stock after a few days, after a week, definitely after a month, and then you might not hold for longer than a year. So that's why you might say to yourself, Nvidia is obviously going to be the winner. I mean, they were the winner. But that's not really how the stock market works, right? The stock market rewards growth and even short-term growth. And AMD seems to be the place with that higher revenue forecast to have that growth, that good technical setup, recent earnings out of the way, not having to worry about that. And even though a gap fill might have been expected down to like 150 after these, big red days, it held this left side peak, which is another technical reason to buy it. And it looks like it's holding up coming into this next week. So, lastly, fundamentally, we don't need the charts at this point, but Nvidia is the clear leader in AI hardware, right? Key partnerships, China would be huge. Whenever people talk about stocks that a company invested in, it's always Nvidia invested in these stocks. They're synonymous with AI right now, and OpenAI is using them, which is the hottest single startup company, all of those categories in the entire world. It's ChatGPT. But if you're thinking about a semi stock for right now, I think AMD is probably worth watching given that revenue forecast. So take a look at both of them, take a look at them technically as well as fundamentally, and don't be afraid to put your money in a stock that may not be as sexy, may have been in a downtrend coming into this year, last year, and let Nvidia digest, let it cool off for 6 months, or even a month or two until that revenue number comes out and we can actually see if the forecasts are correct for Q3. So that's the video. That's the info. Technically, fundamentally, that's the analysis. This isn't financial advice, but leave a ticker below if you want me to take a look at it. Good luck next week whenever you see this video. You guys are awesome. Subscribe for more. All right.